Today I want to review the 7th episode of the Japanese anime Noir, The Black Thread of Fate. When I first watched it, it was a very emotionally charged episode because I thought that Karika was going to die in this one, either by Mario or by the other assassins in this episode. This was another episode where I experienced a lot of feelings of sadness and a desire to see Karika alive to the last episode. Also, the opening, where Karika talks to Mario about wanting to be shot dead and telling her to do it, struck me differently when I was younger. I didn't realize that her intention was to tell Mario that she is a burden and that killing her might be better, because then Mario could escape the country where they committed an assassination and are being hunted down. When I first watched the episode, I thought that Karika was asking her for something along the lines of assisted suicide, which made me feel very powerful emotions toward Karika, and also appreciated how dark, brutal, real, and truthful this series was in depicting how people can experience depression, sadness, a lack of self-worth, or a desire to die. Another thing about this episode is that it made me come up with the term, global noir. To me, global noir is a film genre where noir film takes place all over the world. While it doesn't necessarily span the entire globe, a great example is North by Northwest, where John Scotty Ferguson travels to multiple parts of the United States, such as California, Mount Rushmore, and a chase scene in cornfields near Iowa or Chicago. Global noir isn't set solely in cities. It takes place in many different areas. Another great example is James Bond, because he travels internationally. Another good example is Austin Powers. Even though it's a comedy noir, he travels between London and the United States. Global noir is a compelling genre because it emphasizes the interconnectedness of criminal organizations, governments, and religious institutions, often linked through corruption, conspiracies, and power struggles across different regions. The Black Thread of Fate is a very interesting episode of the noir anime series because it takes place in the Middle East. I appreciate the series for exploring such a different location, and it makes me wonder what would happen if they had episodes set in the Middle East, North Africa, Australia, South America, and other regions as well. This episode is also controversial because at the ending, Karika jumps in the air with her ID and kills someone with enough force to cut their neck and break their chain link earring. This shifts the series from realistic violence to more Deus Ex Machina style violence, where characters are seemingly able to survive situations that would be impossible in real life. If characters are supposed to survive, it's a form of plot armor, unrealistic events that ensure their survival. A good example of this is in Yu-Gi-Oh!, where characters find themselves in impossible situations but always manage to draw the perfect card combination, which is highly unrealistic. Similarly, in Dragon Ball Z, characters gain power-ups at just the right moments to escape danger. This hurts noir because many episodes rely on characters outsmarting their opponents and being underestimated. But when the series shifts into these improbable survival scenarios, it feels like a departure from the established physics of the story. This reminds me of Naruto, particularly Naruto Shippuden, where many viewers started to dislike the series once characters gained power-ups that made them less realistic, going from believable strength to Dragon Ball level power. When characters are established early on with certain abilities and rules, suddenly changing those abilities out of the blue makes them unrecognizable. It undermines the series' internal logic. This shift, in my opinion, is like jumping the shark, and it's detrimental to the series' integrity. I also want to mention that I don't remember exactly where I heard this, but during high school, I did some research on the Noir series. There may be articles about it that are no longer available online, and I have to question my credibility somewhat. From what I recall, the series struggled with tight production deadlines, which likely led to a shift away from realistic violence toward more mystical or exaggerated survival scenes, probably because that's easy to animate or write. Good storytelling, especially in television or film, requires careful planning of all episodes beforehand. Changing character abilities or story rules mid-series to fit a particular scene can weaken the narrative and break immersion. It's important to establish consistent rules and stick to them, rather than rewriting them on the fly. Another criticism I have is that the episode doesn't reveal the names of the main villains. At the end, the credits list two of the revolutionaries as Azudin and Killam. Not giving the villains names or meaningful aliases is poor storytelling. When viewers discuss the episode, they shouldn't be referred to them as chain link earrings or the fat guy with glasses. Giving characters distinctive names helps create more memorable and meaningful storytelling. When the villains abduct Karika, they don't kill her immediately. That's a common trope in many shows where the villains have the upper hand, but delay killing their prey, which often plays into character weaknesses. If noir is such a threat, widely feared as scarier than the Grim Reaper, the death that comes in the night, and a servant of God, it would make sense for the revolutionaries to kill her on the spot, understanding how dangerous she is. Delaying her execution feels like a cliche of villains keeping their prey alive just so they can have a moment of advantage later, which is predictable and overused trope. A significant moment in this episode is the shift in Marielle's character. Instead of abandoning Karika, she chooses to work with her, and even though she's in denial, she shows that she cares about Karika. This episode acts as an important test for their relationship. It's very similar to episodes 10 and 16, where the assassins realize that Noir isn't just one person, but a group. In this episode, they discover that it's a pair of two people, adding to the mystery and establishing the core duo of Noir. There are only 2 or 3 episodes where Karika reflects on how much her fake ID means to her. I wish the series had explored this more thoroughly throughout or incorporated it into the final episodes, because it's so important to her identity. It's a symbol of her struggle to find herself, and although later episodes do touch on this, I feel it could have had a stronger climax if more focus had been placed on it. Another notable aspect of this episode is the character sympathy it builds for Karika. She's nearly killed by her partner, abducted, physically abused, threatened with prolonged torture, and shows trauma responses from brainwashing and recalling her past. The series does a good job of developing her character, especially through the Noir and Soldat's mystery. It explores her inner turmoil, her bond with others, and her acceptance of her fate. The series balances these themes well, avoiding repetition or boredom, unlike Naruto, which often revisits similar themes of neglect and childhood trauma with every villain. Overall, I think this is one of the weaker episodes because of its reliance on unrealism and heavy dialogue and flashbacks. There was so much potential to explore Middle Eastern influences and revolutionaries more deeply. Such settings could have been really interesting with a compelling cast of characters. Additionally, I'm not a fan of the cliché where villains with the upper hand fail to eliminate their prey immediately. It makes villains look stupid rather than competent. The episode opens with Karika lying in bed, and Yuki Kajura Salva Nos begins playing Dominus Deus et Salva Nos Exodius Misere, Dona Nobis Pacem et Salva Nos Requiem Deus, Salva Nos Deus. To reiterate, Salva Nos is a song about a person asking God for release from life, and what makes it very eerie is that it's inspired by Gregorian chants and sung in Latin. Many religious songs are sung in Latin, which adds to the solemn and sacred tone. It also evokes the idea of speaking in the language of God that personally asks for death, which is very unsettling. This sets the tone for the episode. Additionally, it reminds me of one of the themes of The Wasteland, which is that being alive involves a simultaneous fear of death and a fear of life itself. This comes from the preface of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, written in Greek and Latin, but here is the English translation. With my own eyes, I saw the Sibyl Acumi hanging in a bottle, and when the attendants asked her what she wanted, she replied, "I want to die." In Greek mythology, the Sibyl Acumi sought eternal life, but she overlooked the fact that she did not wish for eternal life without aging. She eventually decayed into something resembling a black mulch, and the only way to contain her was to keep her in a cage to prevent her body from dissipating. Her plea for death while burdened by life sets the tone for The Wasteland, which reflects post-World War I despair. When I connect this with Yuki Kajura's Salva Nos Noir, it's about how Karika wants to die, but also wants to live in order to uncover her past. The tragic irony is that she is an assassin who wishes for death, yet she is in situations that make her wish for death every day while wanting to stay alive to solve the mystery of her stolen memories. There's a horizontal pan of Karika in bed. What is noticeable is that it focuses on her breast, which is covered by a shirt. You can clearly see the shape of it, which I interpret as a bit of fan service, sexualizing the character to titillate the audience. However, in the Noir series, such moments are minimal, which helps make it more of a feminist anime compared to others that feature excessive sexualization and objectification of female characters. Mario aims her gun at Karika, and you hear the sound of the gun being cocked. Karika looks at her as if she is taken aback by what is happening. She then looks away and says, "Go on, Mario, do it." It's as if she's willing to be put to death at any moment. She continues, "Thank you for putting up with me." When I first watched this episode 20 years ago, I interpreted that Karika saw herself as a burden, worthless, and an awful person. She believed she deserved to die because of all the assassinations she had committed. This resonated with my feelings as a teenager, feeling worthless because I was emotionally abused for having a mental illness. I wanted to commit suicide because I used to be a very hateful and emotionally abusive person. I remember watching Pulp Fiction, and when Samuel L. Jackson says line about being the tyranny of evil men and trying so hard to be the shepherd, it made me think about how I saw myself as an evil person full of hate, anger, and violence in my imagination, dreams, and inner thoughts. The phrase about trying to be the shepherd also reflected how I was trying to find a path of atonement. I also remember that this was one of the episodes I watched on the happiest day of my life, when I was drugging myself with antidepressants to make time go faster, and not caring about if I died from an overdose. The next day, I was going on a field trip to a comic book store in New London to buy Noir. During that day, I recall my dad telling me I had to walk 6 miles to work, and after working 4 hours, I had to walk 6 miles home because the babysitter didn't have a car seat for my younger brother. That made me feel worthless because my dad was too cheap to get me a cab. As I got older, I understood that my father took advantage of my lack of self-assertiveness and my mental health issues, probably thinking I was too naive to ask for a cab and not realize that he's taking advantage of me. When I was walking home, dehydrated, I imagined myself in this Noir episode, walking to the desert, even though I was actually on Long Hill Road in Guilford, Connecticut. One of the things I want to include in my review is how much this anime has meant to me. During a time of emotional repression, I saw many metaphors and parallels in Noir that reflected my own life experiences. I'm also happy to acknowledge that my initial interpretation as a teenager was somewhat mistaken, and later I was able to understand each scene more accurately. The beginning, where Karika wants to be killed so Mario can escape because she cares about her, is not about begging for a suicidal death. Instead, that theme of Karika wanting to die is more thoroughly explored in the third part Noir, from episode 17 to the end. I really like the overhead shot where Karika is in bed and Mario is aiming a gun at her. It's very cinematic and reminiscent of stylized Noir shots. However, the proportions of Karika seem off. She appears to be 6 or 7 feet tall, with her body spanning across the whole bed, which suggests perspective issues. I also appreciate Monica Rial's voice acting as Karika. She sounds very sad and sweet, and many consider this a career highlight for her. She effectively creates sympathy and empathy, making viewers care about Karika through her delivery. Her voice captures the sadness of a little girl, which adds depth to Karika's character. Mario shudders and appears to hold back tears, unable to deny the bond and feelings she has for Karika. Both of them share trauma bonding. This scene serves as a powerful introduction before the opening credits, establishing emotional intensity and the character's dynamic. Since it's early in the series, it sets up that both assassins still have much to learn about each other, how to be more careful in their work, and how to work together. The fact that Mario was hired to kill Kurika, and that Kurika gives her permission to do so after uncovering their past, creates a complex and tense working relationship. It's an early episode that raises the stakes effectively. After the opening title screen, it cuts to a horizontal close-up pan of a yellow brick floor with specks of green, a blood trail, and an ID card with Yumura Kurika on it, revealing that Kurika dropped it during an assassination mission. Later in the episode, it's highlighted that this is a very big deal because it means that no matter where they're in the world, people can track down Noir. Therefore, they have to go back and retrieve it and eliminate anyone who has seen it to protect their confidentiality. It cuts outside that building, and you see a blue sky with white brick buildings all over the place. Some of the buildings look very dilapidated, honestly reminding you of the Middle East or North Africa. I really appreciate Noir for having a lot of international settings. One of the series' strengths is that many episodes take place all over the world, which breaks up a lot of monotony compared to shows set entirely in one city or location. Outside, 3 men are tied to stakes and are being executed. It's revealed that they hired Noir to kill Balsan, who is a leader of a revolutionary group causing problems in that country. The person being interrogated is wearing clothing reminiscent of the Ayatollah and other Middle Eastern or Muslim leaders, providing a visual cue that the setting is not in Europe, where many Noir episodes typically take place. The client doesn't answer who he hired to kill Balsan, which results in the 2 other men tied to different wooden stakes being shot. After some hesitation, he reveals that he hired Noir. Watching the others tied up and shot dead off-screen is very disturbing, and I remember watching Noir in high school during the anime club, which elicited reactions like, "Oh my god," from viewers because it was very cruel. I appreciate that the series doesn't shy away from dark, violent, and mature themes, showing very cold-hearted violence. It establishes how abhorrent and ruthless the characters are. If you want to create an anime with edge, it's important not to sugarcoat the despicable characters. He reveals that he hired Noir. The name appears on the highest list of assassins. Noir is described as a death that comes in the night. That's all we know. He continues, but mentioning Noir prompted a reaction from one of the interrogators, indicating that whenever Noir is involved, it adds a level of danger because of the reputation surrounding that assassin's name. He then says, "Noir is a servant of God. You defile this land in the name of revolution, and Balsan has paid the price." This adds a lot of mystery. Is this man a religious fanatic, or has he gone crazy thinking Noir is a servant of God? Later in the series, it's revealed that Noir is part of a religious cult. The statement that Noir is a servant of God increases the intrigue because it makes Noir seem almost omnipresent and a powerful force. If people believe they're serving divine purposes or part of a religious prophecy. Given that the series came out in 2001, it reflects the era's religious tensions, including conspiracy theories about the second coming of Jesus, which some believe might occur around the turn of the millennium. The series subtly incorporates these themes, suggesting a societal backdrop where religious fanaticism and paranoia are prevalent. I like the mystery elements where intriguing details are introduced and then left unresolved, enhancing the suspense. The man is shot. He screams in anguish and falls dead, creating a loud thud. The screen cuts to black. Next, it cuts to Marielle and Kurika driving in an RV down a road lined with white stone and white brick. Kurika is wincing in pain, and it's very clear she's wearing a tight shirt, as the shape of her breast is visible. I mention this not to be perverse, but to acknowledge that it's a form of fan service, something often seen in Japanese anime, catering to viewers attracted to the main characters. However, Noir features minimal sexualization, which makes it more feminist compared to other series that over-objectify women. Marielle says to Kurika, "We're going to walk as soon as we pass the river. So, how are you going to manage that?" This kind of dialogue is common in writing to raise tension, as characters discuss upcoming dangers, creating suspense. Marielle continues, "If we don't cross the Aramara, the chopper is going to leave without us." I looked it up, and Aramara is an actual place. This raises questions about whether they have connections that can summon helicopters to help them escape after assassinations, an indication of their resources and network. Marielle then says, "Making a clean getaway is a mark of a pro. You know that as well." This reflects her role as a mentor, older sister, and tough teacher to Kurika. She adds, "Still, if you've been killed, at least I would have been free of you." I appreciate this line for its dark humor. Noir could have benefited from more dark comedy or clever remarks to prevent the tone from becoming too monotonous. It also highlights Marielle's insensitivity and coldness, but her ability to make dark jokes about a dire situation. Exploring her character further with more of these moments could have added more depth. Kurika responds with, "That's true," which ties back to promise they made in the first episode. In this scene and in Kurika's flashback, there's very eerie music featuring Middle Eastern chanting, evoking feelings of sadness, unease, and hypnotic allure. The music helps set a haunting tone that captivates viewers, emphasizing that the series is unsettling but also compelling enough to keep you hooked. The score effectively evokes emotions and enhances the atmosphere. Kurika has a flashback of when she killed Balsan. I really like this scene because it's stylized with red tone. He's sleeping in a bed surrounded by diaphanous red curtains, creating a cinematic, dark, and stylized visual. She shoots him once and walks away, thinking she's slain him. However, he fires back. She shoots him multiple times. This shows that Kurika initially underestimates her enemies, but she learns over the series not to do so. It also reveals her vulnerability, which makes sense since she's just returning to assassinations after waking up from amnesia in the first episode. This scene demonstrates that she can be overconfident and that her skills have room for growth. It's realistic to portray her with weaknesses, overconfidence, underestimating opponents, and some ring rust after a hiatus. It's also typical of characters to underestimate the danger of a single bullet, forgetting that not everyone is killed that easily, and that some enemies require multiple shots to be taken down. The scene cuts back to the revolutionists, and the guy with glasses mentions that he heard about Noir in Pakistan, and that Noir is scarier than the Reaper. To reiterate, they don't mention the names of the main characters throughout the entire series. These two revolutionaries, who are the main characters, I find that to be poor writing. If you want to keep a character anonymous, there should be a purpose for that. It seems like, perhaps, when they were scripting the series, they forgot to include scenes where they mention the names of these characters. The revolutionary with the chain-link earring responds, "We will find Noir and drag him out to the desert sand and stake him out to die." This is interesting because they underestimate Noir by thinking it's a male assassin, likely due to the stereotype in many cultures that assassins are men. They are surprised to discover that the assassins are women, probably in their early 20s later in the episode. So, this episode can also be viewed as a bit of a feminist one, as it shows that anyone can be a killer. It challenges the assumption that assassins are always men, offering some social commentary on gender roles and stereotypes. When he mentions dragging Noir out into the sun and staking her to die, I initially imagined as a teenager that they might do something like expose her naked in the desert sand to burn her, the kind of brutal execution used in some Middle Eastern countries where prisoners are left exposed to the elements. However, upon rewatching the episode recently, I believe they are actually planning to do what they did at the start of the episode: tie her to a stake and assassinate her that way. This emphasizes their reliance on slow torture as a form of punishment. You feel for Karika because she's the most vulnerable and the most developed character so far in the series. The show does a great job emotionally investing in her, and in the thriller genre, it's essential to make viewers care about the characters. They do a good job of making you want her to survive until the very end. The camera cut away to more shots emphasizing how hot the environment is, with special effects making everything appear wavy to highlight the heat and humidity of the sun. Marielle and Karika ascend the steps of the building where they're staying. Marielle helps her because she can't walk on her own. This moment is very similar to the final shots of the series, which I see as strong foreshadowing. In my opinion, this episode is also the first where we see Marielle shift from a lone wolf character to someone who genuinely cares about Karika and helps nurse her back to health. Karika reveals that she lost her ID, calling it really stupid, because the ID isn't the real me. To clarify, her name, Yumura Karika, is just an alias. Her real name is never revealed throughout the series. The show then depicts a series of Karika's inner thoughts, along with clips of her back in high school, under a very strong cyan tone. Cyan being a very intense blue that evokes feelings of sadness. The high school windows are blurred with strong light, almost as if she's trapped in a world of ambiguity and unable to see reality clearly, like she's confined in a box. This visual creates a feeling of being trapped, but also adds an element of mystery, emphasizing her uncertain sense of identity. She says, "When I came to, all names and records were lies. Who am I? What I am is Noir. I don't know anything beyond that. But even if it's a lie, it was in my hands. It belongs to me." There's a very effective transition shot where her falling into her memories dissolves into her falling against a black screen, then onto a bed where she's resting in the present day. This is a great use of visual storytelling, transitioning smoothly from her flashback to her current psychological state. As I've mentioned, this is excellent character development because it makes you feel very sympathetic toward her. It also resonates with people who have identity issues or complicated pasts. For example, I didn't reconnect with my biological father until my mid-30s, when my brother discovered him and introduced him to me, something I wasn't emotionally prepared for. For a long time, I fantasized about what my biological father might be like during a very sensitive period. I even thought he might be an assassin, or that there was some mystical prophecy surrounding my birth. For people with no clear past, who endure trauma and have vivid imaginations, it's easy to jump to schizophrenic-like conclusions, as I did. Fortunately, things worked out for me. But the Noir series really resonated with me because Karika and I share trauma, being hurt by others, feeling unsafe, and try to uncover our pasts while vulnerable. Then, they replay the scene from her memories where Karika is on the bed, and Marielle is aiming a gun at her. This is the only episode where the story is presented out of chronological order, and I wish they did more of this, as it's a common technique in noir, out-of-order storytelling, like in Pulp Fiction, which was effective because it created specific emotional responses. In one scene, Marielle is in the bathroom, cleaning a dish, and she thinks to herself that tending to Karika will prevent her from catching a plane at 4 p.m. to escape the country. She considers killing Karika to prevent her from leaving. I also like how she looks at her reflection, and the mirror appears covered in dust and grime, metaphorically suggesting how ugly she feels for betraying her friend to escape. It's clear from the first episode that Marielle is primarily in it for herself, but this episode shows her beginning to care about Karika. The episode then shifts to a montage of the revolutionaries moving through various buildings, including one that looks like a hotel, and shutting down borders to prevent Noir from escaping. When they are running through the hotel, it feels off. Why would they be doing that? It would make more sense if Noir were inside a hotel room. They also block off borders and checkpoints, but I think the episode could have included more shots of these efforts to heighten the tension. The scene returns to the bedroom, where Marielle is aiming the gun at Karika. She looks like she's holding back tears, about to shoot her, and has a flashback to when she was a little girl, discovering the dead bodies of her brother and parents. Karika, recognizing the situation, closes her eyes and says, "Now, hurry." She knows what's happening and wants Marielle to save herself. She holds her breath, accepting her death sentence. Marielle fires a gun and the camera cuts outside the room, creating the illusion that she has killed Karika. However, it's revealed she shot her pillow. With a smug look, Marielle says, "Do you really think I'd let you take the easy way out?" She continues, "I couldn't care less about you or who you really are, but you're my key to finding the soldats. Once I find them, I will kill you." Karika responds with a smile, "I'd forgotten." I interpret this as one of the series' climaxes, because it signifies that Marielle has truly changed. Despite her protests, she cares about Karika, or at least wants to believe she does. Psychologically, I think Marielle likes to maintain a facade of being alone, tough, and cold. But beneath that, she does have a caring heart. I was also very confused for a long time about why Karika smiles back. Is it because she's happy knowing she'll die someday, even if she has to wait for it? Sadly, people with suicidal thoughts or those contemplating death often feel that way. I believe the honest answer is that she's probably relieved. She trauma bonds with Marielle and wants to uncover the truth about their past. She's happy to live another day, and she has feelings for Marielle. She's glad to spend more time on Earth with her. I also think it's true that she's happy to know she might die someday, even if that day isn't today. This moment adds the darker tone of the series and highlights how tragic and complex Karika's character is, one of the most tragic and well-written characters in all of anime. The next shot cuts to the revolutionaries breaking the van window and seeing the blood on Karika's side of the seat. Marielle steps out to go to the shop and get supplies and aid for Karika. She also gets off the phone with someone, informing them that they won't be leaving at 4 p.m. as promised. As she's walking down the street, she contemplates her decision, then jumps and hides in an alley after seeing a bunch of armed people in a van. She realizes they are tracking Noir, so she drops her groceries and races back to where Karika is resting. I did feel a little thrown off by how Marielle suddenly realizes they're after Noir. The series doesn't give many hints beforehand, but if you watched all the episodes, you'd understand that Marielle is like a detective, doing background research on the people she's about to assassinate. It should have been set up better, so it doesn't feel so out of the blue. There's a really cool shot of her running across rooftops to get to Karika first. When the revolutionaries break into the bedroom, they aim their guns at Karika, and she's not surprised at all. The scene then cuts to the revolutionaries, one with glasses, walking around their underground bunker, where Balsan was assassinated. He discovers blood droplets and Karika's ID. The episode then cuts back to the revolutionaries throwing Karika onto a truck bed, with enough force to make her shake and nearly resemble a carcass. This scene evokes a lot of sympathy because we already feel bad for her, and she's being treated very inhumanely. Marielle observes from a rooftop, contemplating whether to shoot her. She is about to take out her gun, but decides not to, knowing it's not the right moment. She's debating whether to rescue her. There's a really great shot of Marielle sitting on the rooftop all afternoon, into the sunset, debating what to do. She plays with her locket, which contains a melody that reminds her of her childhood and the time she discovered her parents' deaths. They probably do their third or fourth flashback here. Then she hears Karika's voice inside her head, recalling past events. A pilgrimage to your past and mine. It's very clear, if you pay close attention, that she's been sitting there for over an hour, which shows the extent of her trauma and how her memories replay over and over. As someone who has experienced trauma myself, I understand how people can sit and ruminate for hours, with their past constantly looping in their minds. For example, in high school, I participated in something called a GREAT program, where people shared personal stories. Some shared that they were abused as children, others that they struggled with self-mutilation. It was a way to bond. I remember speaking about how I was a hateful person, shaped by the abuse I suffered from my biological mother and the bullying I experienced in middle school. Some people laughed, thinking I was mimicking a Chappelle's Show Clayton Bixby skit. My principal later spoke to me, expecting me to talk about being a proud black man with 2 gay white parents, not about being hateful due to trauma. That experience stayed in my mind for roughly 3 years, fueling anger similar to Marielle's when she recalls her past trauma. The other thing I want to mention is that this scene reminds me of A Clockwork Orange. There's a scene where Alex is looking at water after the Ludovico treatment, and the water level appears to change, indicating he's been standing there for a while. Many interpret this as Alex contemplating suicide, because he's unable to be himself, unable to commit acts of violence anymore. Visually, it's a powerful way to show a character meditating on trauma or their psychological state. Another example is in Taxi Driver, where crossfade depicts Travis Bickle meditating on his anger towards society, emphasizing his fragile mental state. If you pay close attention to this episode, they do a fantastic job illustrating the psychological states of Noir and the trauma they've endured. Even though the characters don't explicitly discuss their past in detail throughout the series, there's a deep, emotional trauma bonding that explains why they eventually care for each other intuitively. The episode then cuts to Altina praying at church before an orange flame, reciting a prayer about 2 maidens who govern death. If you listen carefully, Karika later recites the same prayer, establishing a connection and adding a strong element of mystery. Next, it cuts to Karika in a room with 3 revolutionaries, lying on the ground. They are confused about how she is Noir, referring to her as Noir and the Grim Reaper. But once again, they underestimate her because of their sexist stigma, that a little girl cannot be a deadly assassin. The guy with glasses enters the room, and the others realize she did indeed assassinate Balsan. He asks, "Is that your real name or an alias? Are you an associate of Noir?" She reaches for her ID, looking hopeful because it means everything to her. The guy with the chain-linked earring responds, "You will confess, even if you have to roast in the fires of hell itself." As her small fingers inch closer to the ID, he stomps on her hand. She yelps like a puppy. "You filthy bastards! Killed him, our greatest leader, the great Balsan. Shameless demon, I will make you pay for what you've done." I really dislike his dialogue because he speaks in such abstract metaphors. Nobody normally calls someone a shameless demon or says things like, "I won't give her the release of death until burning sand consumes her." His ambiguity is a turnoff. Additionally, they don't build the revolutionaries as truly dangerous in this episode. I understand that they want to focus on Noir's bond, but this could have been a two-part episode to make the revolutionaries more formidable. Another aspect is the psychological violence. Karika is kicked in the stomach repeatedly by the guy with the chain-linked earrings, but it's off camera. In the early 2000s, I researched Noir and learned that the series was under strict censorship about violence. That's why characters get shot without excessive blood, and why scenes of woman-on-man violence are often implied rather than shown explicitly. For example, in Clockwork Orange, the sexual assault scene is off-camera because leaving it to the imagination can be more disturbing. Similarly, in Reservoir Dogs, they don't show the man's ear being cut off. The audience's imagination fills in the horror. And in The Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal Lecter's murder of the census taker isn't shown directly. Again, what's imagined can be more powerful. Sometimes, not showing violence allows the audience to fill in the gaps, making the scene more disturbing or intimidating. Salva Nose plays in the background as Marielle infiltrates the building, killing 2 people outside. She then enters a room where 6 people are monitoring surveillance cameras. She greets them with a big smile and a very sexy tone, then looks very seriously and kills them off camera. I really appreciate what you did here because her flirting adds a touch of comic relief, but also emphasizes her sadistic and cold-hearted nature. From a psychological perspective, I think she might have done this because earlier she realized she needs to nurse Karika back to health and step away from her tough persona. Now, she wants to reestablish that toughness through sadism. I also like this scene because these 6 people don't have guns. If they did, and she survived because of a quick cutaway, it would be unrealistic and cheap. 6 armed people versus 1 unarmed person is already unlikely, so it's better that she takes them out quietly and efficiently. Salvanos is used very effectively throughout the rest of the episode, adding tension and establishing Marielle as an unstoppable force. Her ability to infiltrate, sneak behind enemies, and ambush them feels very realistic. I also appreciate her stealth skills because they're believable within the context. The episode then cuts back to Karika, lying on the ground, holding her stomach. I want to mention that I once wrote a fanfiction called Snow, inspired by Noir. That scene actually inspired my first chapter, where a girl named Haley goes to Central Park and kills several assassins despite having a severe cold on the brink of tuberculosis. She then boards a plane, travels to Russia to track down another assassin named Alfred Hans. In the Russian wilderness, she's tracked by a man named Molotov, who runs around wielding a hammer and sickle, vomiting large amounts of vodka, and setting things on fire, believing himself to be a fire dragon. Her health is restored when Alfred Hans rescues her, and they form a trauma bond. Unfortunately, I lost all copies of that story, but I plan to write another fanfiction recap in the future. Well, for you dirty motherfuckers. The guy with the chain-linked earring says, "I won't give her the release of death until the burning sand consumes her." As I mentioned before, this line is off-putting because it makes no sense and sounds overly mystical. Good writing requires setting up such dialogue more carefully, giving characters a consistent tone that fits their personality. Before they leave the room, because they're informed that someone is infiltrating the building, Karika begins reciting the ancient quote Altina said earlier in the episode. I really appreciate this continuity. Just like the repeated use of Ezekiel 25 verse 17 in Pulp Fiction, well-crafted writing often repeats lines earlier in the story, giving them new significance later on. This episode demonstrates some of the strongest writing, despite certain weaknesses in character dialogue. It then cuts to the revolutionaries, one with glasses, go in a surveillance room, since they didn't answer phone. Behind him, Marielle appears, and Yuki Kajura's Salva Nos grows louder and louder. The climax of the song plays during the scene, making Marielle feel omnipotent. The music amplifies her mastery of stealth and darkness, creating an intense atmosphere. She turns around, aiming her gun, but shoots him instead. He's not dead yet, but struggling to breathe. She then reveals a secret. Noir is an assassin unit made of 2 people. This foreshadows episodes 10 and 16, where later characters realize that Noir is actually 3 people. I appreciate this foreshadowing and consistent storytelling. Mario only tells him because he's about to die, and she fires another shot, killing him with her silencer. The scene then cuts back to the 3 revolutionaries. The guy with the chain-linked earrings continues to listen as Karika recites the Ancient Fate prayer. When she finishes, she grabs her ID card and jumps into the air with enough force to cut his chain earring and slit his neck. This is where the series jumps the shark, probably the first time it introduces supernatural violence. In good storytelling, such abilities should be foreshadowed from the start. Otherwise, it feels like plot armor, characters surviving impossible situations because of unrealistic powers. For example, in Yu-Gi-Oh!, characters always draw the perfect card at the right moment, what fans call the heart of the cards, which is a deviation from reality. Similarly, in Dragon Ball Z, characters gain power-ups just in time to escape danger, which is also unrealistic. In Noir, Karika moves faster than the eye can see, allowing her to outpace her enemies. I looked it up, there's no scientifically measurable speed of sight. Assuming it's 30 or 60 frames per second, she would need to move at over 102 miles per hour just to be that fast. How did she become the Flash after reciting a prayer? It's a clear example of introducing supernatural abilities without proper setup, which is where the series jumps the shark. As I mentioned earlier, I suspect that, due to the series' rush production, something I learned from researching Noir in high school, they might have decided to throw realism out the window and just go with more fantastical elements because it's easier to animate and write. Mariel then enters a room and shoots the remaining two enemies. Karika continues her monologue. In the end, a lie is always a lie. I thought I knew that from the beginning. Mariel, who am I? I want to note, as someone who has suffered from depression, that when people recite philosophies or speak in mystical terms, it can often be a trauma response. They're processing many painful experiences, looping through memories and feelings. Both Karika and Mario clearly suffer from PTSD and poor trauma responses. Watching the series, one could argue that its central theme is how unresolved trauma and the lack of mental health support perpetuates suffering. During that era, mental health treatment was stigmatized, and many believed therapy was only for mentally retarded people. The character's ongoing suffering reflects society's failure to address mental health issues, especially among those who are repeatedly traumatized and emotionally abused by the Soldats. I also want to give credit to the episode for making both Mariel and Karika redeemable. Mariel acts like an older sister, dealing with her trauma while caring for Karika. Karika, meanwhile, has been physically abused, betrayed, and is responding with trauma reactions. For those who have experienced trauma, feelings of identity confusion, depression, or danger are familiar. This series resonates because its characters embody struggles that many people relate to, making their pain and resilience more impactful. The next scene shows Mariel firing a flare into the desert sky, signaling their rescue. A plane arrives to pick them up. This is the only time in the series where an airplane or emergency vehicle rescues the characters, emphasizing their power and resources. I also like the flare in the sky because it's a visual metaphor that echoes the episode's closing line. Mariel's statement that the thread that binds you and me is the color black, blacker than pitch, darker than night, darker than darkness itself. Overall, this episode does an excellent job establishing the bond between the main characters and emphasizing the importance of teamwork throughout the series. It also offers commentary on sexism and how women are underestimated as dangerous in many cultures, as well as on trauma and trauma bonding. It highlights how these characters continue to suffer due to a lack of mental health support and the emotional abuse they endure. There's a message about fate, that some people live lives where nothing changes, or are controlled or psychologically manipulated by others. Sometimes, all they can do is adapt, survive, and connect with others in similar situations. I also appreciate the foreshadowing set up in this episode, and the use of a Middle Eastern setting, which adds depth and cultural richness to the series. However, this episode does struggle with the villains being very underdeveloped. As I've said many times before, if you're going to have characters speak in an abstract, mystical, or religious manner, you need to build them up much better. Altina, who is explored more thoroughly at the very end of the series, makes sense in that she speaks in an abstract, religious way because her backstory involves childhood sexual abuse, which led her to develop religious thoughts and ideologies. In her case, speaking in this manner is justified and well-developed. Similarly, Karika and Altina's use of abstract speech works because they are complex, well-developed characters. This episode also marks the moment where the series jumps the shark by giving Karika supernatural abilities, such as moving at 103 miles per hour, allowing her to kill someone with just her ID card. This shift into supernatural territory is a significant departure from the series' established realistic, violent style. Overall, this is a very balanced episode, about 50-50 in terms of strengths and weaknesses. It's a great turning point for Mariel's character, but unfortunately, it also signals the series move away from realistic violence toward more exaggerated, supernatural elements.